300, the shopkeeper said, brushing dust off the gilded edges of the broken mirror. His voice had that blend of indifference and cunning bargain that only came from years of haggling. Claire pressed her lips together. Her fingers fidgeted with the frayed cuff of her jacket, the one she'd been promising herself to replace for months. "It's cracked through the middle," she said softly. 200, cash. The man squinted behind his spectacles. The air smelled like old varnish and mothballs. "It's not the glass that's worth anything. Look at the woodwork. That's hand-carved, late Victorian." Claire bent down, peering at the ornate frame. The mirrored surface was a web of faint cracks, silver peeling from behind in patches. Most buyers wouldn't touch it. But she saw the craftsmanship beneath the wear, the small curls of vine and rosettes still alive under decades of grime. 220, she said. "I can pick it up myself." The man hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Some things reflect what they want you to see," he murmured, as though sharing a secret. Claire tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Old mirrors," he said with a shrug. "They hold on to light, and sometimes more than light." She didn't press him. Words like that, in a shop thick with dust and forgotten lives, could mean anything. She counted out the bills from the envelope she kept in the deep pocket of her bag. Rent money, technically, but she'd already decided the mirror was an investment. Restore it, resell it, make just enough before the end of the month. When she got it home, her wrists ached from carrying it 3 blocks uphill. She rested it against her apartment wall, glass turned inward for safety. Her daughter was still at school, the apartment a quiet mess of laundry, scattered crayons, and unpaid bills stacked like a miniature skyline on the counter. She ran a cloth over the frame, and flakes of gold paint fell like dry petals. Underneath, the wood was darker, oak maybe, or walnut, showing its age with proud lines, something solid, dignified. She stepped back, catching her reflection in one surviving triangle of glass. The image fluttered, fractured by the faults across its surface. Her eyes looked tired, older than 32. But they held. That night, after reheating leftover pasta and helping her daughter with spelling homework, she passed by the mirror again on her way to bed. The lamplight made the cracks shimmer faintly, like veins of silver running through stone. She frowned. Near the bottom of the frame, the edge of the wood didn't match. It formed a thin seam, slightly off grain, as though 2 pieces had been joined in haste. She brushed her thumb along the line. It felt smooth, sealed, deliberate. For 1 second, she swore she heard the faintest creak from behind the glass. Wood settling, maybe, or something else breathing inside the frame. She laughed it off, turned the light out, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll start cleaning it properly." But she kept thinking about that uneven line long after the apartment had gone quiet. Morning came with the hum of the city beyond the thin windows. Claire's apartment carried its usual soundtrack, kettle whistling, traffic below, cartoons from the living room where her daughter, Sophie, had fallen asleep halfway through a rerun. The place was small, barely 2 rooms, but Claire had done her best to make it feel alive. Velvet curtains from a thrift store, plants rescued from clearance shelves. A mismatched set of dishes lined the counter, each one a bargain, each one chipped but serviceable. Survival wasn't glamorous, but it had rhythm. Pay what you can, fix what you can't afford to replace. Find beauty where no one else looks for it. She whispered to herself as she set up her workstation. a folding table by the window, a towel clipped down to catch dust. The mirror leaned beside her, tall as she was. Restoring antiques had begun as a weekend hobby years ago, back when her marriage still existed and spare time was something real. Her ex had once mocked her for dreaming of turning it into a side income, said no one would pay for junk polished by amateurs. But since he left, she'd turned stubbornness into craft. Each repaired chair or revarnished frame sold online kept her and Sophie one step further from eviction. She unscrewed the back panel of the mirror, careful not to crack the wood further. The aged nails protested as if they hadn't been touched in 100 years. Beneath them, the backing paper had fused to the frame, brittle like old parchment. As she peeled it back, she froze. Faint scratches ran along the inner surface. Letters, carved shallow but deliberate. She wiped gently with a damp cloth. Latin characters emerged, an uneven scrawl half hidden by dust. She couldn't translate it, but some of the marks looked familiar. A cross, 3 circles in a triangle. At first, she thought maybe an old craftsman's signature, then realized it wasn't placed neatly like pride. It was hidden, tucked behind layers meant never to be seen. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Claire didn't move. Sophie's small voice called from the couch. "Mom, can I have cereal?" "In a minute." Her fingertips traced one of the carved lines again. It tingled faintly, more imagination than sensation, but enough to quicken her pulse. She straightened, shaking her head. "Focus," she muttered. "It's just decoration." But when she pressed at the top right corner, she heard a faint creak. Something shifted. Claire leaned in, guiding her flashlight along the frame's inner edge. For a moment, she could have sworn the backing flexed inward, creating a tiny shadow gap. That afternoon, while Sophie colored pictures in the living room, Claire continued cleaning. The mirror's surface caught flashes of the apartment. Behind her, the pile of laundry she hadn't folded, a water stain on the ceiling, the single birthday card still pinned to the fridge from months ago. Life reflected back at her, fractured and imperfect, yet somehow survivable. Her reflection changed with every patch of silver flake she wiped away. Sometimes the cracks made her face double. 2 sets of eyes, 2 versions of herself. The tired mother and the woman still trying. As daylight dimmed, she turned the mirror to rest against the wall again. The wood creaked softly as she lifted it, a deep, hollow sound. "It's heavy," Sophie said, watching from the couch. "Why do you need that old thing?" "I'm going to make it beautiful again," Claire said. Sophie smiled, a tooth missing on one side. "Can I help?" "Maybe when I fix the glass," Claire said gently. "It's sharp. I don't want you near it yet." Sophie nodded, distracted again by the cartoon's bright noise. Claire stood over the mirror, running a cloth one last time down the edge. The uneven seam caught the light again. Not a random join, more like a disguised compartment. The idea made her breath hitch, but she pushed it aside. Bills still needed paying. Wonder didn't keep the lights on. She scribbled notes for materials to buy. New backing paper, silvering solution, then tucked Sophie into bed. By the time dishes were washed, her palms itched to go back to the mirror. Something in its quiet insistence called out from the living room like an unfinished sentence waiting to be read. She crouched again, flashlight in hand. The carvings shimmered faintly beneath the thin film of dust. She whispered the sound of the letters under her breath. Didn't know what they meant, but there was rhythm to them. Some strokes repeated, as if it wasn't just words, but a pattern. symbols marking ownership or protection. For the first time since buying it, she wondered not about value, but about origin. Who had touched this before her? Whose face had it reflected a century ago? And why hide writing where no one was ever meant to find it? As she leaned the mirror back upright, a barely audible groan escaped from its depths, a wooden sigh settling into silence. A loose floorboard snapped under her foot, startling her. She laughed nervously, caught her balance, and stepped back. The mirror stood still now, tall and solemn. In the half-light, her own reflection wavered once more, framed by cracks that seemed almost deliberate, like the fractures formed a design when viewed from the right angle. She stared for a long time before switching off the lamp. The city hum took over again, thick and distant. When she finally crawled into bed beside her sleeping daughter, she couldn't help replaying the odd weight behind the mirror's surface. Something was there. She just didn't know what yet. And though exhaustion dragged her toward sleep, one thought refused to fade. Whoever had carved those markings wanted to be found, but only by someone patient enough to look twice. Sunday dawned gray and heavy, the kind of morning that soaked everything in the same pale light. Claire moved quietly through the apartment, trying not to wake Sophie. Her plan was simple. Finish the restoration before breakfast, take photos, post it for sale by Monday. Rent was due in 2 weeks. There wasn't time for hesitation. The mirror waited near the window where shadows pooled at the baseboard. It looked harmless now, almost gentle, the cracks catching the thin wash of daylight. Claire tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and began unscrewing the small metal clips that held the pane in place. The sound of old wood against metal whined in protest. Each turn of the screwdriver released a faint smell, musty like hidden dust meeting fresh air for the first time in decades. When the last clip loosened, she rested her palm against the cracked glass. It shifted. A small chip broke loose and tinkled onto the towel beneath. Claire winced, checking for splinters. The fracture that ran vertically down the mirror had deepened, forming a thin, jagged canyon of silver and shadow. For a moment, she wanted to curse, but something about that new split caught the light differently. Behind it, there wasn't the usual white paper backing. There was space, a subtle hollow, maybe half an inch deep. She leaned closer, squinting. The reflection warped her features into a dozen versions of herself, each one curved by the crack's cruel geometry. She set the glass aside carefully, heart thudding. Her hands trembled as she brushed the inner frame. Dust clung to the grain like charcoal powder. When she tapped gently, it echoed faintly. There was nothing solid behind it. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Let's see what you're hiding." She grabbed a flat-edged palette knife from her toolkit, slipped it under the loosened seam she'd spotted days earlier, and pried. The sound was a quiet sigh, almost reluctant. The thin board lifted in uneven jerks until it revealed a narrow cavity filled with darkness. Inside sat a small wooden box, no bigger than a jewelry case, wedged so tightly it looked like part of the structure. For a second, she just stared. The surface was the same dark oak as the frame, edges softened by age, a dull sheen where fingers must have touched long ago. Melted wax had hardened along the corners. Traces of a seal clung stubbornly in the grooves. A crest was carved into the lid, an ornate emblem, half rubbed away but still distinct, a crown above 2 crossed lilies. It looked royal, old world. Claire's pulse accelerated. She set the mirror aside completely, lifted the box from its hidden cradle, and placed it on the towel. The absence it left made the cavity look like an open wound. She ran her thumb over the crest. The grooves were deep, purposeful. Wax residue framed the faint outline of what once might have been a symbol. Maybe initials, though time had dissolved them to suggestion. She thought of her antique forums online, of collectors drooling over authentic regalia pieces. Could this be worth enough to change everything? Then another thought cut through. She'd broken the backing, disturbed something sealed intentionally. What if it was historical property, stolen or private? She sat back, the box on her lap, torn between thrill and guilt. Across the room, the sound of cartoons flickered to life. Sophie, awake at last, oblivious to her mother's silent storm. Claire quickly covered the box with a towel. In the kitchen, she poured cereal, pretending her mind was anywhere but on that pressure building in her chest. Sophie chattered about school art projects, about how paint dried differently if you mix soap in it. Claire nodded automatically, every word ghosted by the thought of the mirror. When Sophie finally ran off to play, Claire lifted the towel again. The box waited, serene and impenetrable. She tried to remember every law she'd skimmed about, found artifacts. Technically, anything discovered inside a purchase belonged to the buyer unless proven stolen. But this wasn't jewelry or coins. It was secretive, hidden, the kind of thing intended to stay buried. Her fingers twitched around the latch, a thin brass line across the front. It didn't lock, but something sticky held it shut. Probably the old wax seal melted into the crack. She hesitated, pressing the box to her chest. Moral tug warred with necessity. She needed money more than meaning, yet curiosity was louder than hunger. What if there were letters inside proving the piece's history? Letters could make it more valuable. That sounded practical enough to justify the ache in her hands. That afternoon, while Sophie napped, Claire cleared the table and pulled the curtains closed. A kitchen knife replaced the missing key she imagined the box once had. She drew a deep breath. "Just a quick look," she whispered. "Then I'll decide." The blade slipped gently under the edge. The seal resisted, brittle but strong, like it remembered being whole. With a soft crack it yielded, releasing a sharp scent. Old paper, dust, something faintly floral beneath decay. Claire froze, half expecting air to rush out or the world to tilt. Nothing happened. The silence thickened, broken only by the refrigerator's tired hum. She opened the lid. Inside lay folded parchment, yellowed and curling at the edges. A leather strap bound the stack together, thin as onion skin but unbroken. Underneath, a smaller rectangle gleamed in the dim light. Something metallic, perhaps a clasp or miniature charm. Her fingertips brushed the top sheet. Writing danced across it in looping, precise lines. Ink faded to brown, yet still legible. French, she thought immediately, her high school lessons blinking awake in fragments. Each letter bore the grace of practiced hands, aristocratic perhaps. Her mouth went dry. Sophie murmured in her sleep down the hall, and the sound made Claire flinch. The moment cracked open. A mother in a small apartment holding centuries of someone else's life on her kitchen table. She leaned closer, heart hammering. On the bottom corner of the outer page, faint wax residue formed half an imprint of the same crest as the box lid. A matching pattern, crown and lilies intertwined. It wasn't random junk. It wasn't a craftsman's note or love letter. It was deliberate, protected, secreted inside an object meant to guard it through generations. And Claire broke tired, barely balancing motherhood had just unearthed something royal. She sat absolutely still, watching the parchment tremble slightly in the breath of air from the window gap. What was she supposed to do now? Half of her whispered the practical answer: rewrap it, hide it, sell it quietly, solve everything at once. The other half whispered in awe: read it. She turned the first page over gently, hand shaking. The script inside curved gracefully into a date: 1784. Another moment's hesitation vanished. The room smelled alive now with history and dust. Claire lifted her phone from the counter, opened the camera, and began to translate the first line word by word. But before comprehension came, one thing was already certain. The mirror had never been meant to reflect her life. It had been waiting for her to find the story sealed inside. Claire sat at the table long after the kettle had cooled. The parchment in front of her looked impossibly fragile, its corners curling like they were trying to hide the ink. She opened the camera app again, zoomed in, and whispered each word out loud. Her high school French stumbled, but the translation tool filled in gaps until a voice began to take shape between the lines. The first entry was dated May 3rd, 1784. "Today I am summoned again to the chamber," Claire read softly. "He looked at me as one looks at forbidden fire." The handwriting was elegant, almost reverent. Beneath the formal phrasing lurked something human, fear mixed with longing. Claire frowned. Whoever wrote it was a woman, clearly educated but not born royal. The tone carried an observer's caution, not a ruler's entitlement. A lady in waiting, maybe, or a servant with access to secrets she shouldn't have known. She scrolled the translation. More lines unfolded. Mentions of a crown prince whose heart drifted beyond duty. Claire paused, her breath catching. It wasn't gossip, scratched in jest. It was confession. Sophie's footsteps pattered down the hallway. Claire scrambled to cover the papers with the dishcloth, smiling sharply when her daughter appeared, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, you're still doing that mirror?" "Yeah," she said, forcing casualness. "Needed a break." "Can we go to the park?" "In a bit, honey." Claire brushed a strand of hair from Sophie's face. "Promise." When Sophie turned back toward her room, Claire exhaled. Her fingers found the parchment again, the texture rough but delicate. She unfolded the next sheet, the ink slightly darker, perhaps written later by candlelight. His letters arrive hidden beneath linen. I burn them, though my heart burns quicker. Claire read it 3 times. The intimacy startled her, tangible even through centuries. Whoever this woman was, she loved someone far above her station, and she knew it was dangerous. She turned another page. Notes about lavish dinners, whispers of unrest outside the palace walls, and servants punished for repeating rumors. The diary shifted tone, edges tightening with anxiety. There is talk of betrayal. The queen grows colder. Claire leaned back, rubbing her eyes. The apartment around her felt too modern, too small to contain what she held. Traffic outside hummed like a reminder that time kept moving, no matter whose secrets she uncovered. She sifted through the stack until a small object slipped free. A photograph. Old sepia, its edges scalloped. At first, she assumed some antique store owner must have mixed it in recently, but the photo's surface was dense with age. The woman's face was faint, her gown from a century far older than photography should have allowed. Yet the pendant around her neck showed clearly, the same crown above twin lilies carved on the box. Claire's skin pricked. It shouldn't exist. Photography didn't start until decades after 1784. Was it a reproduction? A reenactment? Still, the detail looked painfully real, the woman's eyes distant but aware. She flipped the parchment stack over. Several sheets bore matching ink and hand, then shifted abruptly, neater, more deliberate, like the writer gaining confidence as circumstances turned dire. June 1785, one entry read, "They whisper of exile. He swore he would protect me, but I no longer believe words wrapped in silk. I carry a secret heavier than his crown." Claire's throat tightened. Each sentence teased a truth that refused to state itself outright. She pressed the page flat, tracing faint impressions of letters on the underside as if touch could reveal what ink withheld. She fetched a magnifier from her toolkit and held it over the next spread. The diarist wrote about the household watching, about the king's illness, and finally, about life itself, turning upon reflection. That phrase anchored her. Reflection. Mirrors. Claire's eyes flicked to the mirror still leaning near the wall. Its cracked face caught her distorted image from the periphery. The connection dug under her ribs. Someone, perhaps this diarist, had hidden her story inside an object meant to reflect others. She turned another page. The handwriting trembled. Spots of blurred ink suggested tears or water. If he falls, I fall. The child quickens. God forgive me. Claire felt her pulse jump. She reread the lines in disbelief. Pregnant with a royal child? That would explain the secrecy, the danger. No wonder someone had sealed the diary away. For a long while, she didn't move. The refrigerator motor kicked on, bringing her back to now. Her own reflection stared from the microwave door. Worn, anxious, yet alive with the same hunger for meaning that had driven whoever wrote these words. She pulled her phone closer, snapping clear photos of each page. Every translation deepened the picture. The diarist unnamed, writing from behind locked chambers. Mentions of a pendant passed between lovers, of coded marks carved into furniture whenever she feared discovery. Claire's gaze drifted back to the carvings she'd found on the mirror's inner backing. The cross, the three circles. They weren't random symbols at all. They were signposts, a breadcrumb trail for eyes that could decode them. Evening light pooled golden across the table. Sophie returned with a drawing in her hands, a crooked house under bright crayon sun. "This is us," she said proudly. "The house we'll have someday, with a garden." Claire smiled, but couldn't stop her glance from darting back to the parchment. The guilt stung. She folded the diary sheets into soft layers, slid them into an envelope, and tucked them beneath a pile of unpaid bills. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she said. "Keep drawing more like that." After Sophie went to watch cartoons, Claire reopened one final page she hadn't dared touch before, the one bound by the leather strap. The script here was smaller, cramped near the bottom as if written in haste. "If truth has a grave," it read, "let her rest inside the mirror. May a future woman see beyond her own reflection." Her breath shortened. The mirror wasn't a coincidence. It was a vessel. Somebody intended this discovery for another woman centuries later, and somehow she'd answered the call. She looked again at the fading photograph, the pendant's glint, the author's unsmiling face. "A future woman," she whispered. "You meant me." The idea felt absurd, almost mocking, yet her chest ached with recognition. Outside, thunder rumbled. A summer storm pressed against the windows. Claire gathered the papers carefully, slipped them back into the wooden box, and sealed the lid. She didn't bother with tape or wax. Reverence replaced curiosity. For the rest of the night, rain drummed steady against the glass. Claire sat beside the mirror, phone light off, just watching how lightning stitched the cracks with quicksilver. She felt small, humble, but also tethered, for the first time in years, to something bigger than survival. When she finally carried the box to her bedroom, Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, blanket tangled around her small hands. Claire knelt, brushed a kiss across the child's forehead, then whispered, "We'll be okay." Maybe it was a promise, maybe just hope. The mirror across the room caught the faint reflection of them, both, mother and daughter standing where history had quietly waited. Under the next flash of lightning, the cracks on the glass gleamed like words half erased, half rewritten, and Claire thought she saw, just for a second, the outline of that same woman from the photograph gazing back. No movement came, only her own breathing, but the sense of kinship settled deep. Before she turned off the lamp, Claire opened her notebook and wrote a single line. Found diary. Royal scandal possible. Need to know if true. Then she placed the wooden box beside the mirror and went to bed. Sleep came slow and uneasy, carrying dreams of candlelit halls and whispered vows. When dawn finally broke, pale and uncertain, the box waited exactly where she'd left it, but the air in the room felt changed, as if imagination and history had traded places, and she now stood quietly between them. The morning after the storm, Claire woke to the faint hum of traffic and the heavier hum of uncertainty. The box sat on her table like a silent dare. Sunlight crept across its surface, softening the old wood into honey tones. She didn't touch it at first. She only stared, sipping lukewarm coffee, the kind she'd brewed without tasting. Sleep had left her restless. Each time she closed her eyes, fragments of the diary replayed, inked tremors of confession, a crown, a woman whispering to no one. By the time Sophie left for school, Claire's stomach was tight with questions too large for an ordinary Thursday. She opened her laptop. The screen's glow felt like a modern flame called to decipher what candles once hid. Typing 178's Crown Lily's insignia into the search bar brought an avalanche of near misses. European coats of arms, noble houses, half-forgotten orders. None matched exactly, but one, from a small duchy once dissolved into modern borders, came close. The royal seal of a minor prince who'd vanished before ascending. Claire leaned forward, jaw tightening. The diary's dates aligned almost perfectly with his disappearance. Every source mentioned unverified rumors of illegitimate affairs and missing heir speculation. The official record ended abruptly, buried beneath polite phrases about political mergers. She whispered, "So it's true," not quite believing, yet unable to stop. Across her cluttered counter lay bills stacked like reminders that truth didn't pay rent. Still, her pulse raced. She opened the diary again, deciphering later entries. The handwriting had grown sharper, frantic. The diarist wrote of servants bribed into silence, of gifts hidden for safety, and of the mirror guarding more than my reflection. Claire paused. The phrase matched the first time she'd noticed the uneven seam. The woman had hidden this box herself. She turned to the final pages, where ink bled thin as nerves. He says they will name me traitor. If he falls, they will bury more than his honor. I cannot allow it. My child will live, even if truth must sleep. Claire swallowed hard. A single word, faintly smudged near the end, caught her attention. Bordelais, or something similar, depending on the translation glitch. She typed it into the search bar. The results poured out quickly this time. Bordelais Castle, once seat of that same vanished prince, demolished after civil unrest. No burial records for his consort or any illegitimate offspring. Her heart thudded. She cross-referenced dates, media articles about restoration efforts, museum archives digitized for public access. Threads began to weave together like destiny with internet support. The woman in the diary might have rewritten a royal bloodline. Claire clicked another link, this one detailing medieval artifacts in private collections. A photograph popped up, an identical pendant to the one in the sepia image. Crown and lilies intertwined, captioned, "Symbol of disputed lineage." She sat back, mouth dry. The diary was not just a curiosity, it was historical dynamite. The apartment door rattled then, her landlord's knock, brisk and uncompromising. She scrambled, shoving the diary and box beneath a towel, just as he stepped inside. "You're 3 weeks late," he said, scanning the space like a hawk. "I can't keep letting this slide." "I'll have it soon," she promised, too quickly. He glanced toward the makeshift workshop table. "Selling old junk again?" She nodded, pushing a smile. "Couple deals coming through." "Well, make them fast." He left the notice anyway, paper crisp as judgment. When the door shut, Claire leaned against it, breathing shallow. How could she think about rent while holding centuries of forbidden truth? Yet that was exactly her reality. Historical scandal in one hand, overdue bills in the other. She sat down and reread the last full entry. "I hide the evidence where eyes will see, but minds will hesitate to look. If any woman finds it, let her remember we share the same burden, truth or survival, seldom both." The line struck deep, truth or survival. Hadn't that been her own choice since the day her marriage ended? To trade comfort for integrity, to refuse the easy lie that she was fine when she wasn't. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the online antique forum where she sometimes sold finds. She had posted, days earlier, a photo of the mirror's exterior, harmless and decorative. Now the thread had blown up. Comments flooded in, some curious, others predatory. "That crest looks royal," could be worth thousands. Someone even messaged privately, "I collect rare continental relics, cash offer, no questions." Claire stared at the number attached, enough to clear her debts, maybe more. Her mouth tasted of pennies and temptation. She looked toward Sophie's school photo on the fridge. The child's smile, half toothless, unguarded. What kind of example was she giving if she sold history into silence? If for rent money? Yet the phone buzzed again, showing another offer, higher this time. "Serious buyer, discretion guaranteed." She set the phone face down, trembling. The diary's words echoed, "If any woman finds it." Afternoon rolled into gold-tinged dusk before she made her choice. She would verify it properly. No secrets, no buyers with hidden motives. If it was real, someone qualified had to see it. She found a local museum contact through her antique network. Dr. Lillian Dane, curator of European artifacts, known for patience with eccentric collectors. Claire typed out a message, choosing each word carefully. "I've found preserved documents, possibly 18th century French origin, authenticated markings. Would you be open to a consultation?" The reply came half an hour later. "Bring them tomorrow. Confidential appointment. 11 a.m." Her chest loosened slightly, though fear settled in its place. What if they seized everything as state property? What if she received nothing? Sophie came home around sunset, clutching a paper crown from school crafts. "I made this for you," she said, placing it on her head. "You're the queen of fixing things." Claire laughed softly, fighting tears. That's a pretty high title for someone who still owes rent. But you always fix it, Sophie insisted. Then she ran off to feed the cat imaginary cupcakes. Truth or survival, Claire murmured again. The decision settled itself quietly inside her chest. That night, she polished the mirror's edges once more, careful not to disturb the scars running through it. The face looking back at her no longer seemed tired, but sharpened, intent, alive. The same fractures that made it unsellable now reflected resolve. She packed the box into a padded grocery bag, double wrapped in linen, wrote a note for Sophie's babysitter about school drop-off and evening snack. Every motion carried the weight of crossing from uncertainty to conviction. Before bed, she reopened the final page one last time, tracing the dying woman's last words about the mirror's future. For a future woman who sees truth, Claire repeated aloud. The phrase fit the air like a vow. Outside, the neighborhood pulsed with distant sirens and laughter. Inside, a mother plotted not escape, but revelation. Tomorrow, she would deliver the diary to the museum. Maybe they'd laugh at her. Maybe they'd believe her. Either way, she'd finally chosen her side, not the easy coin, but the lasting story. And as she turned off the lights, the mirror caught the room's faint glow once more, throwing back not her weariness, but a reflection steadied by purpose, framed by cracks that now looked less like damage than direction. The morning came cold, bright, and almost dishonest in its calm. Claire woke before Sophie, lying still for a few breaths as the shape of the day formed around her. Museum appointment at 11, proof of history wrapped in an old tote bag. Near the door, panic perched on her chest like a bird refusing to move. She made breakfast quietly. Toast, butter scraped thin, a single egg divided into 2 plates. Sophie chatted about school projects. Claire nodded in rhythm, her mind already wandering to possible outcomes. Would they believe her? Would they claim the diary wasn't hers to present? By the time she dropped Sophie at the neighbor's, her hands shook. She told herself it was just nerves, but beneath that tremor grew a different fear, the one that always came when she risked something she couldn't replace. The museum sat downtown, a pale stone building dwarfed by glass towers. Claire stood outside for a full minute, tugging her coat closed against the wind. The mirror and its box seemed tiny against the sweep of arches above the entrance. When she finally stepped inside, the air felt cooler, tuned to a lower frequency of sound where whispers belonged. Dr. Lillian Dane met her at the reception desk. Late 40s, hair pinned in an absent-minded bun, eyes bright with the brisk courtesy of people used to fragile treasures. "You're Claire? Come with me. I booked a private lab." The small room they entered smelled of paper and caution. Each surface gleamed under white light. Claire placed the wooden box gently on the table while Dr. Dane put on cotton gloves. "This came from inside an antique mirror?" "Yes, a hidden compartment," Claire said. "I almost broke it apart by accident." The curator's brows lifted, curiosity replacing polite reserve. She untied the linen. The scent of age rose again, dry and human. When she lifted the first page, Claire watched her expression tighten, recognition crossing into wonder. "These are authentic 18th century materials," Dr. Dane murmured, "and these initials, ML, appear in some restricted archives I've seen." "Restricted," Claire echoed. "Private royal correspondences," the curator said carefully. "Documents censored post-revolution. This hand, these references, they align with rumors of a prince's affair." Claire's heart skipped. "So it might be real?" It might alter history if verified. Dane looked up, voice almost reverent. Do you understand what you have? Claire tried to answer, but words failed. All she could think about was the rent notice at home and how a single photo online had already pulled vultures out of the digital sky. The curator continued examining each sheet, pulling samples for light analysis. We'll need to authenticate through conservation labs, document provenance. It could take months. Months? Claire said, the word collapsing under its own impossibility. Dr. Dane must have seen the panic. She removed her gloves and softened her tone. Whatever the outcome, you'll be credited as discoverer. Museums handle finder's shares fairly. How fairly? The question slipped out before Claire could call it rude. Dane smiled thinly. Enough to make the struggle lighter, but if a collector offers quick cash, please think twice. Once sold privately, a story like this vanishes. Claire nodded, pretending calm. But as she left the building, the conflicting weights pressed harder, truth preserved or security purchased. Outside, the sky hung low and white. Her phone buzzed the moment she reached the curb. Another message from the persistent online buyer. Final offer, $25,000, transfer today. No need for museum red tape. She stopped walking. $25,000 could erase every debt, fix the car, buy Sophie new shoes without guilt. She stared at the screen until her reflection blurred on it, the city's glare ghosting across the glass. Then she turned the phone face down and walked. Back at the apartment, she found Sophie constructing a fort of blankets and pillows. The audible joy steadied her. Did they like your treasure? Sophie asked, eyes bright. They did, Claire said. They'll study it more. Can we buy the big crayons now? Soon, maybe, Claire promised. She couldn't explain that 48 bright crayons cost less than the courage she had to keep. Later, after Sophie fell asleep, Claire sat alone in the dim light of the living room. The mirror leaned silently nearby, its cracks tracing silver threads like veins of truth. She replayed the museum conversation, months before answers, unknown promises, and the buyer's tempting digits still glowing in her memory. She could close that gap tonight with a single reply. Her phone lay across her lap, unlocked to the message. Finger hovering, she whispered, "It's just paper, ink on paper." But somewhere deep, another voice answered, the diarist's, steady in its faded lines. May a future woman see beyond her own reflection. Claire lowered her hand, the temptation drained, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Integrity wasn't loud, only consistent. Instead of replying to the buyer, she opened a new message to Dr. Dane. I want the museum to handle all disclosures. Please keep me informed. Then she powered off the phone completely. The quiet that followed wasn't relief yet, but it was space. Room enough to breathe without guilt. An hour later, she pulled the restored frame upright and pointed the lamp at it. Her reflection split along the jagged seam, one half shimmering, the other shadowed. Two Claires, one who almost sold out, one who chose not to. She studied both until they blurred into one steady gaze. On the table lay Sophie's handmade crown, pink with glue streaks. Claire placed it softly atop the mirror's edge and smiled. Rent could wait another day. Truth couldn't. That resolve spread through her chest like warmth finally catching after a long cold. The scars in the mirror gleamed faintly, no longer flaws but the proof of endurance. Hers and the diarist's. And for the first time since the discovery began, Claire didn't feel like someone trying to fix broken things. She felt like someone who had learned how to live alongside them without hiding their cracks. Tomorrow would bring scrutiny, headlines maybe, strangers with questions. But tonight, she allowed stillness, sitting before the mirror until her own reflection stopped looking tired and started looking whole. The next morning began with a silence that was almost ceremonial. Claire woke before dawn, heart steady, breath visible in the faint chill. The apartment felt suspended in weight. The mirror stood where she'd left it, its surface darkened by night shadows. She touched the cool edge once, as though asking for permission, then lifted the tote bag containing the wooden box. By 8, she was on the subway. The rattle and hum wrapped around her like a restless heartbeat. Passengers scrolled through phones or sipped coffee, unaware that history, folded neatly inside that bag, sat between their knees. Her mind flitted through every possibility: authentic artifact or elaborate hoax, reward or confiscation. Beneath those, quieter fears lingered. What if they took it, erased her name, rewrote her out altogether? When she reached the museum's research wing, the receptionist recognized her. Within minutes, she was escorted past corridors lined with portraits and display cases that glittered like trapped time. Dr. Lillian Dane waited in an observation lab larger than yesterday's. 2 other experts joined her, a conservator named Malik and a historian named Evelyn Cho. All 3 wore gloves. "Claire," Dane greeted warmly, "we started preliminary tests last night. You should see this." Claire stepped closer. Under the bright magnification lamp, a fragment of parchment rested sealed beneath glass. Ultraviolet light washed over the ink, revealing layers invisible to the naked eye. Malik pointed with a stylus. Same chemical composition as late 18th century French royal records. No synthetic dyes, no modern contamination. Whoever wrote this lived in that world. Evelyn looked up from her notes. And more, there's mention of a Bordelais crest in one passage. That line connects directly to Prince André of Bordelais, presumed to have died without heir. If this diary is genuine, that assumption collapses. Claire's breath caught. Meaning? It rewrites part of the succession, Evelyn said simply. An unacknowledged child born out of wedlock could have carried lineage claims through other families. Dr. Dane smiled faintly, though awe softened her voice. In short, Claire, you've uncovered the missing half of a royal myth. For a moment, the room hushed. Claire thought of her dim apartment, of Sophie brushing glue on paper crowns. The thought that their small lives now intersected with centuries of buried history made her dizzy. Dane turned to her again. But more than history, there's humanity in this. The diarist's voice reveals agency, a woman silenced by politics finding a way to speak through time. She paused. You gave her that voice back. The words landed heavier than any payment could. Claire swallowed a lump that felt too close to tears. Still, reality insisted on returning. What happens next? We'll contact National Preservation Authorities for formal verification, Malik said. There'll be press eventually. Claire's stomach tightened. Press? Dr. Dane nodded. We'll protect your privacy as long as possible, but stories like this travel fast. Within 3 days, fast revealed itself to mean instant. By Thursday evening, the first article had already surfaced. Anonymous sources claiming a local woman had recovered a lost royal confession. Her name wasn't listed, but the Mirror's photograph, pulled from her old forum post, gave her away. The messages began before sunrise: curiosity, offers, praise, skepticism, even hostility. Liar, one comment read. Fake story for attention. Another demanded interviews, sponsorships, appearances. Claire muted her phone, pulse throbbing. Dr. Dane called mid-morning. I'm sorry, Claire. Someone from the conservation team leaked a detail. We're handling it. I never wanted this, Claire said, her voice cracking. I know, but you can still control how the truth is told. Come in tomorrow. We'll arrange a statement together. When she hung up, the room echoed strangely. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, oblivious, cutting hearts from colored paper. You look sad, she said gently, just tired. Did the mirror people make you mad? Claire smiled faintly, kneeling beside her. No, sweetheart, they're trying to help. Sophie considered that. Does this mean we're safe now? The question hit deeper than it should have. Safe. Claire thought of rent, of threats, of being unseen for so long that even success felt dangerous. She kissed her daughter's forehead. I think so, she whispered, maybe for the first time. That evening, she returned to the museum for confidentiality paperwork. Dane met her with cautious excitement. They've officially confirmed provenance, she said. Every reference matches primary archives. It's authentic. Claire let out a slow breath, relief mingled with disbelief. So it's real, all of it. More than real. It fills a historical void scholars have speculated on for 2 centuries, and it will carry your name in the official record. Mine? Claire asked quietly. Discovered by Claire Bishop, mirror restorer, Dane confirmed. And the museum board voted to award you a lifetime finder's share from exhibition revenue. It's modest, consistent, and secure. Claire blinked, trying to process the words. Secure. She hadn't used that word about her life in years. That's more than I expected. It's what you've earned, Dane said. Integrity deserves recognition, too. In the following weeks, attention swelled to something almost unreal. Reporters camped near the museum steps. Academics debated translation nuances on television. Claire watched from home, windows shuttered, using aliases to order groceries. Every mention of her discovery brought pride entwined with anxiety. Then, one evening, a knock came. Not the landlord's, but a courier's. An envelope, embossed with the museum's crest, contained formal certificates, partnership documents, and a handwritten note from Dr. Dane. Truth found a keeper in you. We're honored to help her speak. Claire set the letter on the table, hands trembling. Sophie peeked over her shoulder. What's it say? That the museum will keep the diary safely, she explained, and they'll take care of us now. Sophie grinned. So you didn't sell the broken mirror, but it still fixed everything. Out of the mouths of children, clarity arrived so easily. Claire laughed, tears spilling despite herself. Something like that, honey. Later that night, she walked to the window. The city's lights blurred against the glass, forming ghostly crowns and torch-like flares. The mirror beside her reflected the same scene, except softer, the scars on its surface catching light the way rivers catch dusk. For the first time, she allowed herself to admire it, not as inventory to restore, but as a witness that had finally done its duty. Across the room, Sophie called sleepily, Can we move somewhere with more windows now that we're rich? Claire smiled. We're not rich, baby. We're just okay. And that's enough. She switched off the lamp. Only the streetlight remained, glinting over the cracked mirror. In that half-glow, past and present hung together. The royal woman's secret finally shared. The single mother's struggle finally eased. What began as broken glass had become a vessel for redemption, stretching its reflection across centuries until two women, strangers in every sense, could meet in the space between truth and survival. The weeks after the revelation blurred into calm, like a storm fading quietly beyond the hills. Reporters eventually found new mysteries to chase, leaving behind only a few archived articles and scattered headlines about the Mirror of Bordelais. Claire stopped counting how many times the phone rang. In the end, silence felt like a reward. Her apartment changed first, not in grandeur, but in ease. A steady income from the museum allowed repairs she once postponed indefinitely. A functional heater, new curtains, a fresh coat of paint that softened the walls to a soft oat color. Sophie's laughter filled the space without the undertone of worry winding through it. Claire kept the mirror. The museum had insisted it was hers to keep. The diary belonged in preservation, but the frame remained personal property. She spent days restoring it carefully, polishing edges, reapplying gold leaf where age had bitten deep, leaving the cracks untouched. Every line of damage stayed visible, mended but never erased. Now it hung in their living room, above the couch where bills used to sit like threats. Sometimes guests asked why she didn't replace the broken glass. Claire always smiled. Because it tells a better story this way. Evenings were quiet again, but in a different sense. No longer burdened silence, just peace. Sophie would sprawl on the rug with her homework, tongue pressed between her teeth as she sounded out words, while Claire sipped tea and read museum updates on her tablet. Each newsletter included a small line at the bottom, on loan from the Bishop collection. The first time she saw her name printed like that, she cried softly, pretending the room was dusty. One afternoon, a courier handed her a package from Dr. Dane. Inside was a bound booklet containing the full translation of the diary, completed after weeks of archival verification. A note on top, written in Dane's brisk but kind script, said, "For the woman she trusted to keep the truth." Claire turned the pages slowly. The diarist's words read smoother now, elegant and heartbreakingly clear. No glitches of translation, no uncertainty. Just the steady heartbeat of a woman who had dared to love and then dared to protect what her world refused to forgive. Halfway through, Claire reached the final entry again. Only this time, it was different. The last sentence now read, "The mirror will outlive me, but reflection is never lost. It only changes who it belongs to." She closed the booklet and stared at her own reflection in the mirror across the room. The words rang softly in her chest. The diarist had hidden her story, hoping someone would understand. Centuries later, a stranger in a small apartment had done exactly that. Claire whispered, "You made it, after all." A ridiculous thing to say to glass, maybe, but it didn't feel absurd. The mirror caught her image as if answering. Fractured, yes, but whole within its design. Later that evening, Sophie curled beside her on the couch, tracing a finger along one of the crack lines. "It looks like a river," she said. Claire smiled. "Maybe it is. A river running from then to now." From who to who? "From someone who had to hide her truth," Claire said gently, "to someone who finally found it." Sophie tilted her head. "Like you?" "Something like that." Claire tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. She kept a secret so her story wouldn't disappear. And somehow we ended up being her ending. Sophie thought about that, then nodded solemnly, as if this secret had passed to her too. When night came, Claire tidied the living room, turning off lights until only the lamplight near the mirror remained. She caught her reflection one more time. Lines softer now, eyes brighter from rest rather than hope. For the first time in years, she didn't see struggle when she looked at herself. She saw continuity. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. She took that as the universe's gentle punctuation mark, the same sound that had followed every turning in her journey. Life wasn't magic. It was work, patience, and small mercies returning after long absences. Still, when lightning flickered briefly beyond the curtain, the mirror shimmered faintly, its veins of silver catching that wild light and splitting it into tiny rivers of radiance. A quiet reminder that some reflections keep on living, even when no one's watching. Morning sunlight filtered through the newly restored curtains, soft and forgiving. Claire stood before the mirror in her robe, mug warm in her hands. The glass still held its scars, but the cracks shone delicately now, tiny threads of silver tracing across the surface like constellations on calm water. She glanced over her shoulder at Sophie, now sketching at the kitchen table. The child hummed quietly, pencil scraping across paper. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary life. Yet to Claire, they rang like music. She turned back to her reflection. The woman who looked back wasn't the same mother who once bargained in a dusty shop. That woman had carried exhaustion in her posture and doubt behind her smile. The reflection today carried certainty lined with tenderness, strength softened by humility. The diary had changed history in ways scholars would debate for generations. But it had changed Claire differently, less about lineage, more about inheritance of spirit. The diarist had survived betrayal by trusting truth to endure in silence. Claire had broken her own silence by choosing integrity over escape. Each had fought their own century's version of invisibility. She reached up and rested a fingertip against one fracture line. The silver shimmered faintly beneath her touch, echoing the final words from the translation booklet resting on the table. She murmured them under her breath, voice barely audible. Reflection is never lost, it only changes who it belongs to. The sound seemed to settle into the room, soft as a blessing. Behind her, Sophie called, "Mom, can we go find another mirror for my room? Maybe it'll have secrets too." Claire laughed. "Let's hope not, sweetheart. One secret was plenty for me." Still, when she looked at her daughter's bright face, curiosity alive and fearless, she felt a swell of pride. The past had spoken through her, but the future was already answering. She set the mug on the windowsill and watched morning blur across the cracked glass. The city outside reflected faintly, cars gliding by, light shifting over rooftops. But within that reflection hovered something steadier, something like completion. "Finally," she whispered, "some things reflect what they want you to see." The echo of the shopkeeper's words landed differently now. Back then, they had sounded like superstition. Today, they sounded like truth, because the mirror no longer reflected where she'd been. It reflected who she had become. Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from the museum thanking her again, inviting her to the unveiling of the diary's public exhibit. Claire smiled, replied with a simple, "I'll be there," and slid the phone aside. She let one last beam of sunlight pour over the mirror. The fractured silver caught it, scattering faint glints across the wall like quiet celebrations. For anyone else, it was still a broken antique. For Claire, it was proof that sometimes the most damaged things reveal the deepest truths. She stepped back, took in the softened light, and spoke like the diarist might have, half to herself, half to whoever would remember. May courage, once hidden, find a new reflection. Then, letting the moment settle, her narrator's voice rose one final time, calm and certain. If you've ever looked at something broken and thought it was beyond saving, maybe there's more waiting inside it than you know. What have you found that taught you meaning in its cracks? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more strange, quiet tales of what people find when they finally look twice.